Hello and welcome to my video all about how to knit a spiky edging as you bind off. Each spike or point requires 4 stitches to knit, so you're going to need a multiple of 4 stitches to do this. As you can see, I've done a bit of stockinette stitch and this represents the end of a project. We need to begin the pattern for the edging on a right side row. Right, so first you need to do an SKPO, which stands for slip 1, knit 1, pass a stitch over. So slip a stitch knitwise by keeping the working yarn at the back, taking the right hand needle up through the next stitch as if to knit, but instead of knitting it, you just slip it off the end of the needle. Then just knit 1 stitch, and then use your left hand needle to pick up the stitch that you slipped, take it over the stitch that you knit, and drop it off the end of the needle. You've reduced 2 stitches down to 1, so that's a single decrease. Next you need to do a K2 tog, which again is a single decrease and it involves knitting 2 stitches together. So take your right hand needle up through the next 2 stitches and knit them together, using the same method as a normal knit stitch. Again, you can see you've reduced 2 stitches down to 1. Then turn the knitting over, and if like me you're doing stockinette stitch, you'll want to purl the next 2 stitches. If you're doing garter stitch, then you would instead knit these 2 stitches. And lastly, to finish this spike, you need to bind off. So use your left hand needle to pick up the lower stitch, take it over the upper stitch and off the end of the needle. Cut your working yarn to leave you with a yarn tail at least 6 inches long, and take this yarn tail through the last stitch and tighten. You just need to repeat this pattern to make as many spikes as you wish. The only difference is that now you've cut the working yarn, you need to rejoin it to knit the next spike. So to prepare the working yarn, you just need to make the end into a hook shape, like so, making sure that the yarn tail at the back is at least 6 inches long. Leave this to one side and then repeat your pattern, starting with an SKPO. So you slip a stitch knitwise, and then knit the next stitch. To complete this stitch, you're going to rejoin the working yarn. So take the right hand needle up through the stitch first, then place the hook of working yarn that you prepared before over the needle point at the back. Then complete the stitch. You then use your left hand needle to pick up the slip stitch, take it over the knit stitch and off the end of the needle. Then do a K2 tog by knitting the next 2 stitches together. Then turn your knitting over, and if you're doing stockinette stitch, you'll do 2 purl stitches. And lastly, you'll need to bind off by taking the lower stitch over the upper stitch and off the end of the needle. Then cut your working yarn to leave a yarn tail at least 6 inches long, and take this yarn tail through the last stitch and tighten. And then I'm going to do the last spike in the same way. So I first prepare the end of the working yarn into a hook shape. Then I do an SKPO, making sure to rejoin the working yarn on the knit stitch. Then K2 tog. Turn the knitting over and purl 2. And then bind off. And then all that's left to do is to weave in your yarn tails. So feed each yarn tail into a tapestry needle or a yarn needle and just weave them in to the back of your work. Try and follow the path of the yarn already in the knitting. Make sure that you don't pull the yarn tight because this will scrunch up those spike shapes and it will pucker your work. Keep going until you've woven in all of the yarn tails. And if you're curious about how this would look in a lighter weight yarn, then here is an example using DK or double knit yarn. I used 20 stitches to make 5 spikes, and as you can see, they're just smaller and more compact. And that's it, that's how you make a spiky bound off edge. I really hope you enjoyed this tutorial, and thank you very much for watching.